another fake victory for Russia. Ukraine's defense forces have refuted the claims made by Russian propagandists about the occupation of the city of Rodynske in the Pokrovsk district of Donetsk region. The National Guard asserts that the settlement remains under Ukrainian control. And to prove it, they are publishing footage of the elimination of a group of Russian infantry who managed to infiltrate the outskirts of the city.
The fighters of Chervona Kalina continue clearing the city of Russian occupiers. They are searching for and eliminating anyone who wants to raise the tricolor on Ukrainian soil. And here's a statement from the 14th Operational Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine on Facebook.
The Russian army is not slowing down its assault operations in the Pokrovsk direction. Just since the start of the day, the defense forces have repelled 23 enemy attacks in this sector of the front.
The Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration and the Russian advance north of Pokrovsk toward Dobrapilya. This is clearly the part of the front where about 50% of all efforts are concentrated. Sada, I don't share. In the Sada, I'm always hanging out. I'm right at the Sada. I want to pack up whenever I can. I want to. The task was to encircle Pokrovsk, like Gerasimov hosed Putin to set up a Pokrovsk cauldron. They failed to accomplish this task.
Since the beginning of the day, along the entire front line, the General Staff of Ukraine has counted 101 engagements. The Russian army was most active in assaulting the Konstantinovka direction. The defense forces stopped 24 enemy attacks. The Russian occupiers also tried to advance on the Alexandrovka section of the front. There, they launched 20 assaults in the area of 9 settlements. And in the Orakov direction, Russian troops are trying to advance toward Huliapole from 3 different administrative borders at once. From the Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia regions.
The enemy is trying to advance toward Huliapole from the west in this way. It's extremely important. If they are able to successfully reach the Zaporizhia region checkpoint, it could significantly improve their overall tactical position on the battlefield and create favorable conditions for further advancement and movement toward the city of Zaporizhia itself. This development could potentially shift the balance in the area. Subtitles by Myrnohrad.
Special Operations Forces destroyed a frontline Russian fuel depot and an oil storage facility in the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region. Ukrainian drones delivered a precise strike at the moment when the tanks were full, which amplified the effect. In addition, the day before, defense forces destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 3 armored vehicles, and more than 3 dozen artillery systems. They also turned into scrap metal a Russian multiple rocket launcher system, 547 drones, and 138 vehicles. Over the past day, Ukrainian defenders eliminated 800 Russian military personnel. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia's total combat losses since the start of the full-scale invasion have already exceeded 1,137,000 people.
Pavel, well, let's try to sort out what's happening right now on the various fronts, since the armed forces of Ukraine already have to debunk Russian reports. Yes, they keep at it. Really, nothing ever changes. They keep raving about some encirclements, some pockets, about supposedly capturing a settlement somewhere in Donetsk region. But in reality, all of this turns out, as usual, to be the traditional lies from Russian propagandists. So what is actually happening on the different fronts? Well, let's start with Pokrovsk, as usual, since it's the hottest spot these days. By the way, what else can you expect from the Russians? If Gerasimov, what was it, 2 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, told Putin that Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, and Myrnohrad had already been captured by Russian occupiers, but the situation hasn't really changed much since then. Now he's telling Putin that they haven't been captured, but at least they're surrounded. Well, that's far from the truth. Although, based on his statements, it's clear where the enemy's main efforts are concentrated. And the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration and the Russian advance north of Pokrovsk toward Dobrapilya, it's obvious. This is the part of the front where about 50% of all their efforts are currently focused, both the enemy and our forces. On one hand, our forces are trying with all available reserves to contain their advance, this Dobropilya salient, because it poses a potential threat not only to Pokrovsk. If they actually manage to gain a foothold there, it threatens the rear of Kostiantynivka and Drushkovka, and it would undermine a large part of the front. But they haven't been able to do that. Our defense forces, as you can even see on the deep state map, have been containing them with counterattacks and splitting them up just over the past few days. The situation there is complicated. Well, it's probably even more complicated, the situation on the Pokrovsk sector. Because what's the situation here? The 51st Enemy Army had the task of encircling Pokrovsk. As Gerasimov reported to Putin, to create a Pokrovsk encircle list. They failed to accomplish this task. Fighting there continues. Today, literally, the Azov Brigade once again refuted the Russians' lies that they had managed to capture Rodynske. No, that did not happen. But since events are not unfolding according to the most favorable plan for the Russian occupiers and generals, they are switching to Plan B, which had been postponed. Remember, 2 months ago, or in July, the Russians were sending sabotage and reconnaissance groups into Pokrovsk. Even then, we said this was reconnaissance by combat. Reconnaissance by combat for street fighting. And now, from the south and southwest, they're trying to infiltrate the city. The situation there is really tough. This might not be not a different form, but a tactical form of assaults that differs from those we remember from the battles in Bakhmut or Avdiivka, but essentially, the situation is very similar. There are tactical differences, but the objectives remain the same. The Russians are now fighting. A decisive battle for Pokrovsk. Pavel, let's talk about the situation. Recently, there have been a lot of fakes, especially those spread by the Russians themselves when they dress up their presidents. Green with polka dots. And they listen to reports about their so-called successes from their own generals. It was painful to watch as the entire European press, as colleagues in Europe picked up this production from propagandists of the Russian Federation, from their news agencies, and reported that all 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers were surrounded, that the city was captured. But it was clear that this was more of an information stunt. At the same time, in his conversations with so-called allies, Putin boasted that he would be able to capture the entire Donetsk region by October 15th. And here's what's important. Why exactly October 15th? By the way, Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, recalled this in a conversation with journalists during an interview for Axios. Zelensky also refuted the claim that Russia is supposedly achieving successes on the front line. Still, here's a question for you. Why do you think it was so important for Putin to specifically mention October 15th? And what does it mean for Putin's army when their so-called commander-in-chief makes promises or sets certain deadlines?
And these deadlines just keep falling apart and collapsing, and they are drastically different from what's actually happening on the battlefield.
Well, obviously, here Gerasimov just wanted to play along with his boss when he was telling him stories, lying to him. About the encirclement in Pokrovsk, about the encirclement in Kupiansk. If Putin wanted to know the truth, obviously, he would have found it. And he knows that Gerasimov is lying to him. But it's Gerasimov who's lying, and then I keep lying too. The general will be the edge. Putin's propagandists lie for him, and then everyone else picks it up. Western media, the BBC standards have now turned into something else. In general, your colleagues could explain better what the BBC standards have turned into. Journalists know better and can describe it. The reality is that Russian propaganda seeps into Europe with the aim of further influencing European leaders, the United States, in order to
First, I apologize, but at the same time, to influence, that's exactly the point, to influence. All right, propaganda tries to influence the average European, the average American, but the leaders of these countries hear and see this too. They absolutely understand clearly what's going on. To what extent can these lies on the battlefield and in the media play a role now and, for example, speed up certain processes? Weapons supplies, for example, supplies. Something like that, which we probably can't talk about on air, but it would be very useful on the battlefield, somewhere underwater or in the sky. How might the situation change regarding supplies to the armed forces of Ukraine?
Well, look, right now, Putin has sent Dmitry to Washington once again to try to build relations with Trump, to tell him fairy tales. They might once again influence Donald Trump's already shaky position. He, in turn, indirectly influences European leaders. And as an example, I'll mention military aid to Ukraine. The funding of the aid package for this summer and fall, when in July, that aid dropped off significantly. July, August, early September. Why? Because in Europe, leaders were listening to Trump and thinking, well, if Trump really manages to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia right now, then what's the point of investing in Ukraine's defense at this moment? That's how it works. The main goal seems political on the surface, but in reality, it has a specific military economic application.
You know, as always, we traditionally discuss with you the range of our defenders, the improvement of our capabilities in this area. But look, just recently, a map appeared online showing the supposed locations of Russian air defense systems around Moscow and in the Moscow region. And on this diagram, published by a journalist from Radio Free Europe, a wide variety of air defense systems were shown S-300, S-400 radar stations, and their infamous Panzer system was also displayed. Well, basically, what did we see last night? Last night, we saw how Russian mobile anti-aircraft groups were spotted literally right next to the Kremlin in Moscow. And what's most interesting is, what happened right after that? Afterwards, reports appeared that in Serpukhov, just outside the Russian capital, something is still burning. Specifically, an oil depot, which also received a friendly visit from some drones. What do you think the Kremlin gang should expect in the near future? Well, since, actually, they were confident that at least they had protected their capital, but it turns out, not really.
Obviously, they need to use fewer magnets, because when they talk about Ukrainian drone debris hitting their strategic sites, well, it seems like they're attracting them. They're attracting them and will keep attracting them. There will be strikes on military strategic targets. In the Russian Federation, both in the Moscow region and deeper into Russia, even beyond the Urals. President Zelensky stated this literally today, that the Ukrainian diplomatic strike campaign will continue. And the more the Russians concentrate their air defenses on Moscow, the more they bleed the rest of Russian territory dry. Moscow, Valdai. Somewhere else in Sochi, the main vital organs of the Russian Empire. Everything else is not so important. Therefore, by creating such, there used to be 3 rings of air defense. Now there are already 5 rings if you count the air defense systems within the city itself. In the Russian capital itself, this means there will be fewer air defense resources available for important sites across the rest of Russia. If you look at the maps, the Pokrovsk maps of the Far East, it's already bare there. Almost all the air defense has been removed from there. Next, it's Siberia's turn. Well, what's next? The Urals. The Urals are already being hit, and hit successfully. As for Crimea, we will strike. We will create corridors for our friendly drones, peacekeepers, who will respond to Russian blackmail, Russian terror against the peaceful Ukrainian population.
The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, held a meeting of the staff. There was a staff meeting, and during this meeting, the expansion of the geography of long-range strikes on the Russian Federation was discussed. Looking at how the air defense is working, how they're trying to shoot down drones near the Kremlin, what do you think will be more important now for the Russian leadership, for those in power? To protect themselves or to protect the facilities? Those who might be included in this expanded geography, how much are they afraid of staying alive themselves, but at the same time, with the love of the population? Is the Russian Federation currently able to protect its important energy facilities and military infrastructure?
Well, you can see for yourself. Russians have published materials and investigations about the protection of Moscow, about the protection of Putin's residence in Valdai, about the protection. Putin's residence in Sochi, on the Black Sea coast of the Caucasus, which reveal where Putin's weak spots are, what he protects the most. Let me repeat, the expansion of the defense system around Moscow, its surroundings, is happening at the expense of something else, by draining resources from other sites. For now, those other areas have been completely drained. The Far East, Siberia. Putin and his generals believe that our drones can't reach there. Well, that's still up for debate. But nevertheless, as Russian systems are destroyed and the air defense around Moscow becomes denser, the focus shifts further. They won't be able to produce more air defense systems than they already can. If they concentrate them in some places, it means they're simply leaving other places exposed. The task of our intelligence services and the defense forces of Ukraine is to identify the enemy's air defense lines, the areas of their air defense that need to be either overcome or bypassed. That's exactly why we've repeatedly explained why radar stations are being hit in Crimea and why anti-aircraft missile systems are being destroyed there. Well, literally, again, today there was good news from the main intelligence directorate. This was the destruction of several such targets. It's not just for the sake of devaluing, you know? $500 million, or however much one of those systems costs. No, what's happening is that a corridor is being opened up for our strike assets to hit targets, including, as I've said before, in southern Russia. Now, judging by the range of use, this already includes targets in southern Russia as well. The scale of Ukrainian drone strikes is already reaching a much larger area of the Russian Federation. And to bypass, to reach the main targets, which are oil facilities, military factories, warehouses, arsenals, and storage sites for military equipment and ammunition. These are the main targets for Ukraine's defense forces. And the Kremlin will collapse on its own.
That's for sure.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.